Far upriver in Sichuan, waters rise as spring winds roar. How can I dare to meet her now, to brave the dangerous gorge? The grass grows green in the valley below, where silkworms silently spin. Her hands work threads that never end, dawn to dusk when the cuckoo sings. The Western predilection for exotic goods was perpetuated in the European mind from early in the 13th century, when Italian adventurer Marco Polo related fascinating stories about visiting a far-off luxurious land called Cathay, one that was seemingly filled with precious gems, spices, gorgeous silks, and lived in by an amenable people who whiled away their hours posing pleasantly in perfect pavilions set in ethereal landscapes. It is perhaps extraordinary to us today that just one man's personal view of the East played such a vital and in so many ways unique role in the development of international foreign trade and political relations. But it did. Marco Polo said, "Let us now travel into Cathay, so you may learn something of its grandeurs and treasures," inspiring the notion that at the turn of the 14th century, China was a land unlike any other, an idea that found fertile ground in the imagination of Western people. Initially, Europeans could not differentiate between Chinese, Indian, Japanese, Southeast Asian or Middle Eastern peoples, so their vision was vast, did not reflect the geographic reality, and most of the time their imagination ran on overtime. Baron Ferdinand von Richthofen, an accomplished Austrian geologist who was involved in extensive research on the geology of China during the 19th century, is the man that coined the term the Silk Road. He used it to describe a network of ancient trade routes that had stretched from as far away as Japan and China, diversifying as it passed through India to meet at Constantinople and then merge into a melting pot of various trading ports around the Mediterranean. Travelling overland 7,000 kilometres, Chinese merchants moved a trickle of Chinese export wares regularly, and their arrival in Europe provided an opportunity to establish a continuing dialogue between peoples of different cultures. We know that as early as 5 centuries before Christ, there were reports of peacocks and parrots from the east in Greece, and that the Romans had discovered silk during the course of a battle in 53 BC with the Parthians. The unfurling of gleaming silk banners by their enemies made a lasting impression, and within 7 years silk canopies were in use at Julius Caesar's triumphal entry into Rome. During the reign of Emperor Augustus, it became the passionate predilection of Roman patrician wives to wear silk, scandalising the more conservative members of the Senate, such as Seneca, who said, "I seek garments in which there is nothing to cover either the wearer's body or her shame." A highly specialised activity, the production of silk, or sericulture as it's known, was developed by farmers in north-central China. Thinker, political figure and educator Confucius, in one of his ancient texts, tells us that it had emerged around 2,700 years before Christ, although today's archaeologists in China have found fragments dating much earlier than that. Silk filaments are extremely durable, have a tensile strength greater than steel, and when unravelled from the cocoon are about 1 kilometre long. However, at each stage of its labour-intensive production, silk demands great skill and coordination as it is carefully removed from the silkworm's cocoon, because if the chrysalis emerges during harvesting, the continuous filament is severed. Once harvested, it was wound carefully onto a skein that was carded to form floss for padding winter clothes, or otherwise spun to form threads for manufacture of what we would call raw silk. Silk was so valuable and precious in ancient China, you could pay your state taxes with this important commodity, and production was strictly controlled to ensure it maintained its prestige and retain its quality during production. Fine silk clothes and furnishings were worn and used on special occasions in life and to honour those in death. The evolution of Chinese ceramics began by crafting hand-moulded earthenware vessels from a mineral-rich clay containing kaolinite, silica and feldspar elements that occurred naturally in soil and sedimentary rock. The crystal structure of the minerals allowed them to adapt easily and readily to change, and by shaping, moulding and modelling the clay, it was possible to create every shape imaginable, although it's important to emphasise that success was determined by those that would not decay or fall apart during the firing process in a kiln. As in Europe, using the dates of ruling houses, or in China's case dynasties and emperors, to assign dates to ceramic wares and their development doesn't really work except as a general guideline, since at all stages during their stylistic and technical development there was a great deal of overlapping. The Shang dynasty ruled for over 600 years, 1751 to 1111 years before Christ. Their early years were deeply formative for the establishment of a Chinese culture. Urbanization and the use of written language were two of its greatest achievements. As time passed, Shang rulers indulged increasingly in luxury, and indolence in their tombs have yielded a wealth of carvings in marble and jade, and above all magnificent bronze vessels for which the dynasty has become known. The rulers of the Shu dynasty, 1111 to 256 years before Christ, sent their relations and followers to establish fortress-type cities, sharing many features with the later medieval feudalism in Europe. The peasants tilled the land specifically for the lord of the district, who was obliged to present himself from time to time at the royal court or to raise an army for the king if required. Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in getting up every time we do. These words come from who the Chinese call the Great Master, who was born during the Shu dynasty from 551 to 479 years before Christ. Known best in the West by the Latinized version of his name Confucius, his vision was of a stable society, one in which men lived in harmony and tried to better themselves through education. His many observations contributed much to Eastern, and when they were known, to Western ideology. He also said, "Study the past if you would define the future." Taoism was the opposite view that stated the power is that of the many, who give up ambition and somehow surrender their whole beings to nature. These are values the Chinese, and indeed many others, have grappled with ever since. The Han Chinese are considered indigenous, and their dynasty, known as the Qun, was established 249 years before Christ and remained in place until 206 years after Christ. Today, its most famous emperor has become known through the discovery of his tomb, guarded by something like 7,000 individually life-size terracotta warriors, every one of which is uniquely individual. It is believed that one of its emperors in the 1st century had a vision in which he saw a divine being, gold in colour, flying about in front of the palace. One of his ministers explained about a famous sage in India who had learned how to fly, had a golden body, and was called Buddha, and Buddhism became widely adopted. Ceramics as an art form has long indigenous traditions, but greater artistic expression was only possible as technology advanced in kiln building and by potters gaining complete control of the fire. Both of these conditions prevailed in China. In the 1st century, wood charcoal fueled foundries and a technique of harnessing hydraulic energy for working bellows in foundries was invented. Ceramic design at this time was influenced by exposure to other cultures and via their trade with Persia, India, Greece, Rome and Syria. Chinese potters gathered ideas, and many different decorative elements became integral to an ever-increasing ceramic design repertoire. Pottery from this period is decorated with geometric designs arranged in bands around the body and neck. In the year 104, the invention of paper facilitated an ability to record facts and also great moments of ceremony or ritual. This is when the recording of China's standard histories began, and a government department became responsible for keeping a day-to-day account of the present dynasty while writing the official history of the previous one. It also marked the beginnings of a tradition in fine classical literature. The Xu dynasty, 581 to 617, saw China united, and short as it was, it paved the way for a period of stability that began with the Tang dynasty, the era when China's prestige grew throughout Asia as its emperors began to be involved in affairs beyond their borders. Founded on a prosperous economy, the Tang Empire, 618 to 907, witnessed a flowering of creativity. Science and technology, art, music, painting, pottery, calligraphy, literature and religion. It was a golden age. Missions of commercial relations rather than diplomatic ones reached China from India, and according to one report from Byzantium, Iran sent embassies between 713 and 750, which included dancers, musicians and horsemen. Sha Jing, or the Book of Tea, was first written in the 8th century, and its author Lu Yu explained for the very first time every aspect of the beverage from cultivation to brewing, with delightful poems and aphorisms about tea. He also recommended the beverage be drunk from jade cups, and tea drinking became a daily ritual. He said, "Tea tempers the spirit, harmonizes the mind, dispels lassitude and relieves fatigue, awakens the thought and prevents drowsiness." Tang potters used lead glazes which vitrified or became glass-like at low temperatures. They also introduced the use of cobalt oxide, a new type of colorant known in Persia, Syria, Egypt and other centers since 2000 years before Christ. To paint with cobalt, workers needed to be very skilled, quick, and their brush strokes deft and sure. It was in the Tang dynasty that the three-colour lead glazes came into vogue from about 680 to 750 years after Christ, and some of its most enduring images are of horses and women polo players. Polo is the world's oldest team sport, whose origin is lost. It was played from Constantinople to Japan, with the first recorded polo tournaments in 600 years before Christ, when the Turkomans beat the Persians in a public match. It was the Persians and the Mongol conquerors of India who spread the game of polo across the Eastern world. Tang statuettes of women were much sought after, and there was two types. One supple and slender, wearing a very high waist and stole, the other with a fuller matronly figure with loose robes and wide sleeves. The typical clothing of a Tang dynasty official when presenting a written report to his superiors was a tall hat, a wide-sleeved outer garment tied at the waist with a wide belt, and a rectangular kerchief in front, with a white inner gown hanging over his square shoes. It was the Chinese potters of the Tang dynasty who discovered first that if they fired their stonewares at a very high temperature, that the body of the ware would change its characteristic. This would be the first step in a progression to produce porcelainous wares, which would be later refined with advanced kiln technology during the Ming period. There are many romantic attributions for the origins of the term Celadon, which became a generic term for ceramics finished with a coloured glaze ranging from olive green to sea green, which had been derived from iron. Before glazing the ceramic body, it was treated with a ferruginous or rust-coloured slip and fired in a reducing atmosphere, which is one that simply deprives the kiln of oxygen, and that loss results in a change in the colour of the glaze. This meant that highly skilled potters could manipulate the kiln to achieve the coloured effect they wanted. Celadon wares were eagerly sought after by the Persians during the Song dynasty from 960 to 1279. They believed that Celadon wares would break or change colour if poisoned food was placed in them. The word Celadon literally means the colour of natural things. Some historians have taken it as being a deformation of the name Salah ad-Din, the Sultan of Egypt, who in 1171 sent 40 pots of this colour to the Sultan of Damascus. The Japanese particularly appreciated the black wares made during the Song dynasty because they were so aesthetically pleasing. Tea bowls taken to Japan by Chinese monks visiting Buddhist monasteries at Tianmu as a tribute were not merely a material gift or donation, but an important statement that China, its rulers and its culture believed that they were at the centre of the then known world. At this point in ceramic history, black was an optical illusion produced by dark, opaque, coffee brown glazes. Potters were striving to enlarge their colour palette and patiently coaxing a veritable rainbow of browns from the Earth's abundant iron oxides by manipulating the oxide concentrations and firing temperatures of the kiln. A 13th century tea bowl made from a pulverised, low-grade porcelain stone has a fairly thin matte glaze and ornamented with the skeleton impression of a leaf. The dexterity and skill of the potters controlling a glaze so it would crackle deliberately is evidenced on this bottle manufactured in the imperial workshops at Hangshu in the 12th century. This style of decoration more than likely came about by accident. However, potters found the effect so aesthetically pleasing, they spent a great deal of time learning how to bring it about intentionally. They used differing coefficients of contraction and expansion, and by submitting the piece to rapid cooling immediately following firing. The much feared Mongol warrior Kublai Khan earned the title Great Khan by defeating his brothers and embracing Chinese culture, and in 1260 Peking became his winter capital. He then set out to rebuild the city, and in 1271 announced the beginning of another Chinese dynasty with himself as first emperor, naming it Ta Yun, meaning Great Origin, and he would govern along Chinese lines. The new emperor, Kublai Khan, sent a message of friendship to the Pope at Rome, as well as a request for 100 learned priests and oil from the lamp burning over the Holy Sepulchre at Jerusalem. It would be Marco, Niccolo Polo's son, aged 20, who would be the man that would deliver this to him. Marco Polo delivered the first reports about China back to Europe when it was still emerging from medievalism, and the effects of his accounts were phenomenal. It was recorded that he was the governor of Yangshao, and a fanciful account said he suggested palaces and pagodas were roofed in gold. It is more than likely he was talking about the yellow ceramic tiles that were used on roofs of imperial buildings because they glinted golden in the sun. Yellow was the colour associated with all the imperial emperors and the imperial city where the emperor, his family, retainers, eunuchs and maintenance people all lived together. Marco Polo met Kublai Khan in the summer palace of the Mongol emperors, where he delivered the requested message from the Pope. He described it as full of sumptuous pavilions set with a wall surrounding quite 16 miles of land, in which are fountains, rivers and lawns. How is the night? The night gives way to dawn. Courtyard torches are glimmering. Our Lord is coming. I can see his banners. And now it's time to take a break before part 2 of Precious Cargoes from Cathay.